Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me. This is the episode 10 preview. Texas. Been looking forward to doing this state for a long time. Similar along the lines of California and Arizona and a few others. I have just had so much material for Texas acquired over the years, and I really struggled actually to figure out which article to go with that would be a kind of a good introduction um, to this episode. And I'm about a day late here on recording this. I wanted it to go live today. Today's Friday. And yeah, so I ended up just going back with the original article I presented or that I wanted to choose. And again, as always, I want to thank everybody who's been following me along for this series and all of you that are new to the series as well. Yeah. So let's get right into this. This one's called Texas Prehistoric Gods. It's from a DC newspaper, 1900. Let's make sure this is viewable for everybody at home. Hey, yeah, thanks again for being here, you guys. Let's get this going. Texas, prehistoric gods. 3 races of people have inhabited that state. Some remarkable discoveries of old ruins, an ancient temple dedicated to the sun. From the St. Louis Globe Democrat. So this is a DC newspaper, but reprinted. I guess the original article was from the St. Louis newspaper. Western Texas is literally covered with mounds, ruins, and long lines of earthworks. Now remember that, because once we jump into the series on Tuesday, we're going to talk about the Great Wall of Texas, a wall similar in size and stature to the Great Wall of China, and a construction that's going to be very important because it's going to take us into a very exotic realm. The only way I can describe it is Atlantean. The exotic metals. And over the years, I've hypothesized that Atlantis, as we know it, was really a conglomeration of several places. And I just released a video today entitled Was Atlantis in Nevada? We covered a city in Nevada that was a ringed city that was miles and miles and miles in size. Probably housed millions of people. And we're continuing a similar concept and idea from Alaska, and here we are in Texas. Okay, we've covered pottery similarities, mounds similarities, many things. And yeah, before I get too far off subject, but long lines of earthworks, including walls that are incredibly advanced that are buried so far underground they lose all sight of the wall, and they basically refuse to um, dig this wall up. You know, in this time frame, the reasoning was money; it's too expensive. But nowadays, I think there's a little bit more to that. Anyways, that were evidently constructed by a race of people who possessed the earth long before the Red Indian of modern times appeared and disappeared. Absolutely. We've pretty much shown conclusively from, again, every state in this series that there were races built upon races, built upon races. And Texas is going to be no different. Archaeologists believe that no less than 3 different races of people. Let's set that magic number again, you guys. You know, that we keep finding that 3, 3, and then we're the fourth, or fourth, and we're the fifth. Um, the Aztec legends tell that we're the fifth age. And um, then possibly the sixth. We'll perhaps get into a little bit of theosophy, root race stuff later on down the road, and talk about the sixth age and that we're the fifth right now, which seems to go along with what um, these older cultures had been saying, that these previous civilizations had been um, wiped. Correlates with a lot of the mud flood research that's going on. And I'd say that there isn't an episode that we have done so far that doesn't corroborate this same concept. 3 different races of people, none of whom was of the least kin to the North American Indian, have lived and passed away at widely separated periods of the world's history in the country now called Texas. The most modern of these prehistoric people was a race that inhabited the valleys of the Colorado and the Rio Grande. They dwelt in houses built of sun-dried bricks and partly dressed stone. Their ruins are not abundant, but they are easily found in many well-known localities. The cursory exploration that has been made has shown that these people were of Toltec or Aztec origin. Now, again, Toltec and Aztec are different. This is an important thing to think about, and why eventually down the road I will do a series on the root races, and that's going to be an important topic to talk about. Who were the Toltecs? Who were the Aztecs? What was the difference? It seems definitely to be a wipe before in between these Toltec and Aztecs. And it is possible that they flourished contemporaneously with their kindred in Mexico. Now, we've talked also that we've found almost all phenotypes from California, and here we are in Texas. And I've said the same thing about the Gulf, the Atlanteans, that it wasn't comprised of one race, it was several. Another race who dwelt in long subterranean galleries, always well protected by a system of earthworks, inhabited the plains nearer the seacoast. And later in the article, or in the series, we're going to talk about how far inland the ocean actually came. We're going to talk about buried cities some more. It's going to take us to Galveston. We're going to talk about a city hit by a tidal wave, strengthening our tidal wave Chicxulub crater event. Traces of their works of defense and portions of their habitations are yet in evidence over vast areas of the eastern part of the state. These people always lived in cities, and at some remote period, the region that they inhabited must have been densely populated. Absolutely millions. A still older race, one that perhaps existed when Europe was a wilderness. I mean, isn't that incredible, you guys? Like from the 1840s through the 1900s, the earliest articles continually saying that Europe was a wilderness when these cities were flourishing. And remember, these are civilizations on civilizations. So how old are they really? Seem to have pressed their feet upon every acre of Texas soil. Let me say that again. A still older race, one that perhaps existed when Europe was a wilderness, seemed to have pressed their feet upon every acre of Texas soil. The entire American continent was covered in millions, if not billions, of people. It's hard to find an area anywhere that isn't composed of ruins. And where you find desolation, often you can just go down a few feet below, and there's going to be some type of ruin. Many of the cities today in Texas, from El Paso to Austin, Houston, Galveston, are built on the remnants of a previous civilization, similar to what we've been saying all the way down through here. They must have existed in countless swarms, for their ruins, though many of them are barely perceptible above the face of the earth, are encountered at every step. They dwelt in small circular mound shaped houses, the walls of which were made of loose stones and dirt, while the roof was doubtless composed of grass and clay. This just echoes again back farther into Utah and Arizona, where the mounds that were buried in sand and earth that had trees growing on them were actually giant buildings housing hundreds of people. These habitations were partly subterranean. We've shown that they were wholly subterranean, and if they weren't covered in earth, they were buried underground. Again, habitations on habitations. For the floor was always about 3 feet below the surface of the earth, and much farther down than just 3 feet. But again, this one is just talking about that surface level group here. There are places on the plains of Texas where the traveler may count these mounds until he is tired, and then, in whatever direction he may turn his eyes, he will see other collections of mounds spread out in endless confusion over the plains and hills to the extent of his vision. Exactly. Just like Colorado, Arizona, millions of people, metropolis, went on and on and on and on and on. Can you imagine? This went from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the Gulf. Congregated at waterfalls. These people congregated in countless hordes at the waterfalls of the great rivers where fish were easily taken, though everywhere there is a depression in the earth on the western plains, which at some remote period contained water. The mounds are sure to be in evidence on the adjacent slopes. The stones that form the walls of these habitations invariably show the effects of fire. Really important here. This is just like what we talked about in some of our early episodes, that the buildings look as if they had been melted. They are crusted with black lime and smoke, and they bear a striking resemblance to rocks that at some time had formed the body of a chimney that had been used for centuries. Yeah, the entire mound was the chimney? No. No, these things got roasted, hit by some calamity. The people who constructed these rude shelters were evidently savages of the lowest type. They were probably an Auto Chitanois. Going to mutilate that word here. Anyone can correct that. Race, and the first of their kind that ever breathed the air of this continent. On account of some very remarkable discoveries that were accidentally made, considerable interest has recently been excited concerning these old ruins. An effort has been made to explore and uncover what is believed to be the ruins of an Aztec city in the valley of the Colorado near Marble Falls, which has resulted in finding a considerable collection of antiquities, relics, and curiosities. The objects that have been found have not yet been examined by an expert in such matters, but a few of them are believed to be of considerable value. The credit of the discoveries belongs to Miss Almanet, an educated young lady who is deeply interested in everything pertaining to the early history of Texas. The place where the first excavation was made is believed to be the site of a palace occupied by the king or ruler of the country. The ruins are covered with several feet of dirt, making a mound some 40 feet in height. Okay, so we're dealing with the place where the excavations first was made is believed to have been the site of a palace occupied by the king or ruler of the country. The ruins are covered with several feet of dirt, making a mound some 40 feet in height, upon which oak trees are growing that are thought to be at least 400 years old. After reaching the floor of the building, the workmen found an abundance of broken pieces of pottery, but not a single whole vessel. Near one of the walls, protected by a large granite slab, the first curiosity of any value was brought to light. This was a small stone image about the size of a billiard ball. One side presents an ugly human face, and there is a hole in the neck, as if the head had at some time been fitted to the end of a staff. It perhaps represents one of the gods of war of the old Aztecs carried at the head of their armies. After the great slab had been removed, two more heads were found. These are of life size, and they are supposed to be busts of the sovereigns who ruled the country, perhaps at the time of the destruction of the city. They have been chiseled out of hard granite, and although the work is rough, they show that these people had some knowledge of the art of sculpture. The brows of the head, one of which is evidently intended to represent a female, are encircled by bands, some resemblance to crowns. Two of the ears were broken off. Prehistoric mound. Not far from the ruins of the palace, there is a mound which rises more than 100 feet above the surface of the surrounding country. Wind and rain, and perhaps the storm of centuries, have worn the dirt from the rocks on the top of this elevation, and it required very little exploration to reach the floor and inside walls of a small structure that was evidently identified with the religion of the people. It was perhaps a temple dedicated to the sun. On the center of the floor, there was an altar about 4 feet in height, on top of which there was a solid slab of granite nearly 7 feet in length and 4 feet in width. Lying close to this altar was found a hooked nosed god with enormous ears. It is an ugly, hideous monstrosity, and is doubtless the bloody old war god to whom they sacrificed human beings. The enormous nose of the god is hooked over at the point like the beak of an eagle, and there is a crude figure on the forehead which was evidently intended to represent the sun. A large knife, which has since been misplaced, of course, or taken, was found near the sacrificial altar. It was made of bronze. Fragments of several rather large vessels made of clay were collected from the floor of the temple. One easily imagined that these pieces of pottery were stained with blood, for they were probably used to hold the life current of the victims sacrificed to the hideous god. The laborers declared that there was a peculiar, repulsive odor about the place, the odor of decayed human flesh, which neither the passing ages nor the action of the elements had destroyed. The most valuable object found was discovered in a small building which was probably the sovereign's private arsenal. It is the head of a monarch, and Miss Ney believes that it was carved to represent no less a personages than Montezuma. The skill displayed in the workmanship and molding of the features show that the artist possessed ability of rather high order, considering the age in which he lived. It was at first believed that this rare relic was composed of pure gold, but it has since been shown that it contains considerable alloy. There is enough of the precious mineral in it, however, to make it worth a very large sum of money. One might reasonably hope to find gold in these ruins, for they are located in the heart of a mineral region where every little stream flows over golden sands, and the mountains are literally seamed with quartz leads rich with precious minerals. When Cortez was operating in Mexico, he heard a great deal about the seven cities of Cibola. They were said to be located in a region where gold was abundant. In the course of time, Coronado was sent at the head of a considerable force into the region lying north of the great river to look for the famous cities. There is some evidence that the ruins which Miss Ney is now engaged in exploring are all that remains of one of these cities of Cibola. Gold has been washed from the tributaries of the Colorado in this vicinity in paying quantities. During the summer of 1850, a flourishing mining camp was established on Big Sandy, only a short distance from the ruins, and more than 1,000 miners were engaged in washing gold from the stream. Seven cities of Cibola. Within a few hundred yards of the ruin, there is an old furnace, the walls of which are blackened with the fire and smoke, and nearby is a little mountain of ashes and cinders. There is a trail leading toward Mexico, which has been worn deep into the solid granite by the hooves of animals, as if it had been traversed by long pack trains for centuries. Everything goes to show that at some period of the world's history, Mining and the smelting of ores has been carried on here on no small scale. Whether the vast treasures which Montezuma possessed were drawn from some hidden bonanza in this region, or whether the Spaniards worked rich mines in this vicinity, are questions that will perhaps remain forever unanswered. At this very moment, an old Californian is engaged in gold mining within a few miles of the Aztec ruin. He crushes the decomposed quartz with an auto strike, R estray. It's like a big um, more and pestle type of thing to break up the ore. And it is said that this is making good money. Miss Ney has collected and investigated everything in written history, story, song, and tradition concerning this interesting region. She firmly believes that the people who inhabited this old city were perfectly familiar with some method of mining gold and smelting silver, and she thinks they accumulated and possibly secreted vast quantities of precious minerals. Some of the testimony that she has collected upon this subject is interesting. Aunt Hannah's story. An old Negro woman who was carried off by the Comanches in 1830 and kept in captivity by them for nearly half a century is still living in Burnett County, Texas. During the greater portion of the time, this old negress lived with the Indians. They occupied the Colorado Mountains, and one of their principal villages was located at the falling waters of the Colorado, only a short distance from the ruins that are now being explored. Aunt Hannah, as she is called, confirms a story that has often been repeated. She says that during the early years of her captivity, the Comanches always had plenty of gold. In the course of their time, they either lost their way to their gold mine or else they quit accumulating gold for fear the white people would come in overwhelming numbers and drive them out of the country in order to discover the source of their wealth. Aunt Hannah says that if she were not totally blind, she could go straight to the very spot which she often saw the Indians gather large quantities of gold. She insists the deposit of precious mineral is not over 5 miles from a big spring which flows by the old ruins. She describes the country with singular accuracy. Miss Ney has led the old blind woman over the ground, and the young enthusiast on the subject of archaeology and hidden treasures believes the Indians got their gold from one of the numerous little streams that flow into Big Sandy, where a novice can find a color with every pan of dirt. Aunt Hannah says the Indians only visited the mine for the purpose of gathering gold when it became necessary for them to send it to Mexico after a supply of ponies. Yeah, this is a story that's very old. Again, we started the article off with saying we're dealing with races, several distinct races or groups of people that predated the Indians as we know them today by hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands, and that the Comanches of this time period were mining old mines and they were trading it to Mexico for horses. Then the whole tribe strung out along the gulch, while the chiefs and others of the family picked handfuls of nuggets from a little white seam in the pocket near the edge of the water. A silver mine on the San Saba and lead mine on the Pedernales were easily found through a description that this old woman gave of the localities in which they were located. That the gold mine has never been found is hardly a matter of wonder when we come to consider the fact that there are hundreds of gulches almost exactly like in the region where she says that the precious deposit is certainly hidden. It is believed that old Hannah is now about 100 years old. She crawls about on her hands and knees, jabbering in English and in Comanche, but she never varies in her description of the famous lost mine or of the mountains, rivers, creeks near it. She tells the story just as she did 20 years ago. She sits day after day in poverty and gropes in hopeless darkness within 8 or 10 miles of the locality where she firmly believes the richest gold mine in the world lies hidden by little loose earth. Some very level-handed people besides Miss Ney are of Aunt Hannah's way of thinking, and there are wealthy men in Texas who would give a physician a very large sum of money if they would restore this old woman's sight for a few days. Oh, I just love that. Not to mention that she was kidnapped in 1830. You know, an old, you know, black-skinned woman in 1830, stolen by the Comanches. Living in Texas. That alone is worth a discussion in itself, but obviously we're here for the Texas prehistoric gods. Um, yeah. So as we get into our series, we are going to find more and more Aztec overlays, sacrificial overlays, pyramids, Great Walls of Texas, Great Walls of China in Texas. Um, yeah, giants, um, Bigfoot. Yeah, it's going to get weird. It's going to be great. So hopefully you enjoyed this preview video. Kind of get us started on the right foot here. Give you a little bit of a foundation of what we're going to be talking about. So yeah, while we're here, we'll kind of just show these two guys. Um, when they talked about the hook-nosed god, it immediately reminded me of this gentleman. He's found in similar regions of Texas and Arizona, along what was called the trade routes. And remember, the description in this talked about paths in the granite being worn by endless trains of horses. And this guy, he's called he's basically the Lord of the Nose, and he's the merchant god. I'd bet that this is a representation of who we're dealing with here. Um, yeah, but it could easily also be this gentleman here. When we're dealing with Aztec mythology, there are so many overlays, and again, I believe that there are cultural overlaps here that don't necessarily just represent one race or one period of time. But sacrifice was given to both of these people on a very large extent. It's quite terrifying, to be honest, and we're going to get into that a little bit here. But yeah, thanks for joining me for this preview video. Look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday. Thank you so much, guys. Peace.